More than 5,000 U.S. troops at our southern border. The president with a message for those migrants.
When you look at that caravan and you look of largely very, big percentage of men, young, strong, a lot of bad people in there, people that are in gangs. We don't want them in this country. We have millions of people coming in. They're applying. They're coming in legally. We have a very strong border. I called up the military. This caravan is not, they're wasting their time.
Fox Live team coverage now with Kevin Corke at the White House. But first, we'll go to William Lajeunesse. He's in southern Mexico. William?
Well, Sandra, that is a huge change in immigration law. Obviously, it will be challenged, but it is true that having a child born in the U.S. is a motivator. It does help the illegal immigrant obtain residency. The child can apply for the parent. We've talked about birth tourism in Southern California. That's a big problem. The medical bills along the border with county hospitals there, that's a problem. Some women here are pregnant, but by and large, the children that you see here is really about obtaining asylum, basically seeing the shelter space is limited, the law is in their favor. And in fact, about 3/4 of the parents who were given the option of returning to their home countries with their child or letting that child stay in the United States, 3/4 said let the child stay in the U.S. Now, as for the exodus from Central America, it continues. It's accelerating. There are 3 additional caravans right now, one in Guatemala, one in El Salvador, and one at the border. This caravan continues. The Mexican offer, the generous offer of a work permit, medical care, housing, a school, that has been largely rejected by most of those here. They remain committed and determined to go to the United States. No, I'm sorry. So there is about 100. Here's some information we got last night. 150 buses have been requested from the Oaxacan government to get to Mexico City. It's about 450 miles. It's a 3-week walk. There's a narrow, winding mountain roads, and for the safety of the caravan as well as motorists, they want those buses. They want to go to Mexico City, talk to federal officials there about migrant rights, safe travel to the U.S., what services Mexico will provide to the immigrants. In fact, there was a Mexico City official here yesterday going over what they're going to need. They could put them at Azteca Stadium, also the Monument of the Revolution. Now, the people here remain, again, largely uninformed and unaware. We did see an attorney yesterday from the U.S., a migrant attorney, giving them information about how to claim asylum in the United States. I'll send it back to you guys, but I'll tell you, they remain determined to go to the United States, although they are unaware about the additional border security and changes in the asylum law that are going to make it very difficult, not getting north and have no money to go south. It could be a crisis along the border in Tijuana, Calexico, etc. Back to you.
William Lajeunesse, thank you.
In the meantime, President Trump saying that he wants to end birthright citizenship for babies born here to non-citizens, and he plans an executive order to make that happen. The move comes 7 days before midterms. The president and the first lady later today head out to Pittsburgh, showing support for the city where the first funerals begin for victims of the synagogue massacre.
I'm just going to pay my respects. I'm also going to the hospital to see the officers and some of the people that were so badly hurt. And I really look forward to going. I would have done it even sooner, but I didn't want to disrupt any more than they already had disruption.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke picks up the story from the North Lawn there today. Kevin.
Bill, good morning to you. The White House is moving forward with this very interesting because there's language in the 14th Amendment that's really at the center of this controversy. Let me share part of what it has to say, and I think you're going to hear a great deal about the 14th Amendment over the next 24, maybe 48, 72 hours. It reads thusly. The 14th Amendment states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, it was meant to make sure, Bill, that freed slaves were indeed citizens of this country. But the key phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that's the cornerstone of the controversy. In the president's view, that means if you're subject to the jurisdiction of this country, meaning you're already here legally, this amendment applies to you. If you're not subject to the U.S. jurisdiction, meaning you're subject to the jurisdiction of another country, you're a foreign national, the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to you. either way, this would certainly be challenged and assuredly would end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. The practice, as you also know, of allowing children of foreign nationals to automatically become citizens has also been blamed for so-called birth tourism and chain migration. In fact, the president told Axios and HBO that's in part why he wants this to stop.
You can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Now, technically, the U.S. is not the only country that allows birthright citizenship. Canada, for example, certainly does, Brazil and other countries. But there are a number of major economies, large countries and small, that have repealed birthright citizenship over the last 25, 30 years. Among them, as you see, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, France, India, and the U.K. Critics arguing this is a midterm election ploy, but the president is clearly determined to push this through. Meantime, as you pointed out, Bill, later on today, the president and First Lady will make their way to the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. They're going there, obviously, to offer comfort and to bring healing to a hurting community. They're going where the members of the Jewish community in particular were affected by that devastation over the weekend, that vicious attack. Of course, as we get details once they are on the ground, of course, I'll be sure to pass it along. But for now, back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin Corke from the White House there. Thanks.
Exactly 1 week until the midterms. Fox News power rankings just shifted two hotly contested Senate races, moving New Jersey's Menendez-Hugen matchup from likely Democrat to lean Democrat. And the Texas race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke from likely Republican to lean Republican, as the president plans nearly a dozen rallies across the country between now and next Tuesday. Joining us now, Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor. Chris, good morning and good looking tie to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
You've got your midterm election best on this morning. So what are you watching at this moment?
Well, look, we moved those races because it's time for everybody to acknowledge that what is most probable is not the only probability. And these races are interesting. They are almost identical in several key ways. You have embattled incumbents who are both ahead, and they are both in an average of recent polls over 50%, so they should be safe. But in New Jersey, if there is a red wall, as Republicans talk about, if they win with suburbanites, dig in their heels, they could actually flip this seat. Bob Menendez has plenty of trouble with his past ethics violations. He's not a popular figure. But then conversely, let's say the other scenario takes place, which is the big blue wave. Now, what's most probable? Both of these states will remain in the hands that they are. But if in Texas, the Democrats do get the big blue wave they've been looking for, and Hispanic voters, younger Hispanic voters particularly, engage in ways that they haven't in previous midterms, and disaffected suburbanites turn on Cruz, then guess what? That could happen too. So this is the message from these moves, from us to you, to the viewers, to the readers, is pretty simple. There's three scenarios out there. One's more likely than the other two, but keep your eyes open because this is a weird year.
Okay, and let's throw up the polls so we can let everybody know where things stand at this moment. The Texas Senate race among likely voters: Quinnipiac, O'Rourke 46%, Cruz 51%, don't know 3%. On whether, let's throw up the New Jersey Senate race first before we get to whether people change their mind in the next few days. Here's Menendez and Hugen. Menendez 51%, Hugen 46%, don't know 5%, which is why now I want to show the poll on whether voters would change their mind before the election. Quinnipiac polling reveals mind made up 98%. Chris Stirewalt may change 2%. So.
But other than that, they're feeling very open-minded. Other than that, they're feeling very open-minded. Other than that, yes, right, so we're down to the wire, right?
We're down to the wire, and as you mentioned, this is really going to be something to watch. So, what do you make of all that? And as folks sort of zero in on some of these key races, speak more broadly about what we're about to see.
What you're seeing now, and this is very much what the president is trolling, and it may work on the birthright citizenship stuff, sending troops to the border. Immigration is the single best issue for Republicans. For years, it was the best. It was a great issue for Democrats. They exploited it. They used it against Republicans. They used it to fire up their base and fear mongering. Now Republicans are doing the same in reverse. The president has found a way to turn scare tactics on immigration into Republican favor in key districts. It's going to hurt him in some places, but as you see with the map of his travels where you're talking about, he's going to the reddest of the red, the burning beet red districts across the country, places where he can really help and really fire up enthusiasm without creating, he hopes, the corresponding blue backlash, because he doesn't just fire up Republicans, and tactics like this don't just fire up Republicans, they fire up Democrats too.
And he clearly gets out there and enjoys these 11 rallies across the country between now and Election Day. A lot of talk about what the biggest issues are in all of these places, whether it's health care, the economy. We're talking about the border. And as you mentioned, he's bringing into the conversation the birthright citizenship. This is now a big discussion that is being had. How much do things change between now and Election Day, Chris?
Well, the funny thing is this. People who care about that stuff probably have long ago made up their minds. But the people who are the swing voters, they also tend to decide late, right? Because they don't like their choices. They're not strongly affiliated with either party. They're waiting until the very end. They're going to hold their nose and vote. So that means that the events that transpire over the next 7 days could be very consequential indeed. And that's why a little gust this way or a little gust that way could turn New Jersey red or Texas blue or anything. And that's why we watch.
Chris Stirewalt, the countdown is on. Thank you for your time this morning.
You bet.
Thank you.
Right about 11 minutes past the hour now. Fox News alert now on the man accused of sending more than a dozen pipe bombs to prominent Democrats, making his first appearance in court. Disturbing new details emerge about what he may have had in store. We'll get to that in a moment.
Plus, a turning point in the Russia investigation with special counsel Mueller expected to announce his findings after the midterm elections. Former House Oversight Committee Chair Jason Chaffetz will weigh in next.
It's ridiculous that I have to do anything because we didn't do anything, but we will
remember the victims and denounce hatred. Today's services are for two brothers, Cecil and David Rosenthal, Dr. Jerry Rabinovitz and Daniel Stein. It was Saturday morning when a gunman entered the Tree of Life synagogue and opened fire, killing 11 and injuring 6 others. The suspect, Robert Bowers, was injured in a shootout with police and made his first court appearance yesterday. Federal prosecutors say they plan to seek the death penalty.
There should have never been a special counsel, in my opinion. It's an illegal investigation, totally. A lot of people agree with me. A lot of people on your show and on other shows agree. There was no collusion. There was never any collusion. It shouldn't have ever happened. I have made everything available. You know why? Because I have nothing to do with Russia.
That's President Trump during an interview with Laura Ingraham, slamming the Russia probe, but he says he will probably respond in writing to some questions from special counsel Mueller as the Russia investigation nears a critical point with key sentencing dates on the horizon. Weighing in now, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, former House Oversight Committee chair and a Fox News contributor. Is that a good idea for him to answer some questions, at least in a written form?
Yeah, I think the president does things differently than most every other person out there. Most legal counsel would say don't do it. But certainly written questions are fair game. And I think the president has from day one said, I'm open, I'm transparent, and I haven't done anything. So I might as well answer those questions.
So this is obviously entering a critical point here as we near midterm elections. The response from the president, how does this all conclude? How do we eventually see this all come to an end? Well, it hasn't been, on the front burner for quite some time because of all the news. Jason, where does this all go next?
Well, I think even the Democrats are getting tired of the Russia probe. In the last closing 8 weeks of the election, you don't hear him talking about Russia because there is no evidence. They don't have anything. And other than a flailing Representative Adam Schiff, you don't hear anything about this. There have been no prosecutions or allegations against anybody to prosecute anybody regarding Russia that's close proximity to the president. And I think it's time for Mueller to to wrap it up, show what he found. I do think Director Mueller has fallen short because he has not pursued Uranium One. He did not pursue the FISA abuse and the Democratic money. That's the only evidence that we have of things going on with Russia is Democratic money going to pay people overseas to try to spy ultimately on Donald Trump.
Which should spur the question, what happens if the House flips and Democrats regain control of the House? They've promised a congressional investigation.
Well, Congress has a legitimate right to provide oversight. The country is going to decide 7 days from now. Do they want Adam Schiff to have a gavel? Do they want Maxine Waters to head up financial services? Do they want Elijah Cummings to head up the oversight committee? If they do, they'll have subpoena power, they'll have the gavel, and they'll have the ability to go after the Trump administration.
So this is according to two sources close to Trump's legal team that this probe is, quote, winding down. We have not heard specifically from the Mueller team commenting on their timeline here. But when do you see all of this winding down, Jason?
Well, obviously, next Tuesday is a inflection point, because then once the election's done, I think Mueller very soon after that has a duty and an obligation to go before the American people and wrap this thing up. I think you're going to see some movement on Attorney General Sessions and Rod Rosenstein from either from the White House or from them personally. But all of that's got to happen, and I think that happens in November, and hopefully it'll be a good Thanksgiving by then.
Do you think that there will ever be a sit-down interview with the special counsel with the president?
It doesn't seem to gravitate to that point because there doesn't seem to be any evidence of any crime. And so if you haven't gotten any evidence after nearly 2 years of a probe, then why do you need to sit down with the president? There is no need to do that. Do they submit some written questions and the president answers those? Hey, that sounds great. But there is no evidence at this point.
All right, we will see where all of this goes. According to Catherine Herridge's reporting on this, there's outstanding issues to be resolved before these written answers would be submitted. There's also additional reporting on confirmation of that happening via Bloomberg. So a lot changing on that front. We'll likely learn more soon. Jason Chaffetz, the former congressman, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed.
In a moment here, the fiance of columnist Jamal Khashoggi speaking out her urgent plea to the president in the wake of his apparent murder in Turkey. In a moment.
Plus, a big backlog in security clearances for Trump administration officials, sparking calls for the system to be overhauled. Is the current system causing a national security threat?
System. Jillian Turner is live in Washington with a look at the difficulty in finding a trusted government workforce. What gives, Jillian? Good morning.
Lot of difficulty, Bill. Good morning to you. The Trump administration's taking a hard look at how individuals are granted confidential, secret, and top secret access to the nation's most sensitive secrets. Hot on the heels of President Trump revoking clearances from multiple former senior officials, including former CIA Director John Brennan. Sources tell Fox News the White House has more candidates on the chopping block.
Security clearances are very important to me. Very, very important. And I've had a tremendous response for having done that.
But the administration's not going it alone. They're now working with Congress to overhaul the entire security clearance system, soup to nuts. The vice chair of the Senate Intel Committee says he's working on legislation that'll bring a new policy across the finish line.
As bad as the problem is on people who serve in the government, as frankly, most of you know, it's even worse on the contractor side. As you move from one contract to another, still within DHS, it's taking 120, 150 days. That is not fair to the contractor. It's frankly not fair to the taxpayer.
The White House and Congress agree the current system's outdated and bloated. Warner says the process is still based on a model from the 1970s, and the numbers are overwhelming. In 2017, 1.6 million people had confidential or secret clearances, and another 1.2 million had top secret, totaling up to what sources describe as a staggering 2.8 million people total with security clearances. Officials also say there's a major backlog. Today, about 660,000 people are waiting for security clearances to be granted in order to do their jobs. Senator Warner says the problem's so bad that the backlog itself now constitutes a threat to U.S. national security. Bill?
Big job. Thank you, Jillian Turner, on that in Washington. Thanks.
Meanwhile, investigators make a shocking discovery in the van of the man accused of mailing pipe bombs to prominent critics of the president. What police are now saying he was planning.
Also, President Trump says that he wants to restrict birthright citizenship. How would that work, and would it pass legal muster? Former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy is in studio live, coming up next.
It's new reports quoting police sources say Cesar Sayoc had more than 100 potential targets. Phil Keating's live in Miami with more on this. Phil?
Sandra, that reported list of names, either possibly a hit list, but definitely a hate list. But all of the recipients of the more than a dozen mail bombs over the past week reportedly is on that exact list. Attributed to federal law enforcement sources, investigators combing through the alleged mail bomber's white van over the weekend for evidence found this list of about 100 Democrats and Trump critics. His van plastered with right-wing messages and images pro-Trump and anti-Hillary Clinton and Obama. 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc lived in that van and possibly built the IEDs inside that van. He had his initial court appearance in federal court yesterday. Sayoc, sporting a ponytail, was shackled and wearing prison scrubs. He said very little, and the whole thing was over in just about 4 minutes. At one point, Sayoc looked around the standing room only courtroom, spotted his sister, and appeared to tear up. Representing Sayoc in court Monday, attorneys who have represented him before in his dozen or so other run-ins with the law.
That representing him in the past, he was the most polite, most respectful person that I've ever represented, and so I am choosing to allow the system of justice to go where it goes, that he is innocent until proven guilty.
New footage of the politically charged partisan shows him at a 2017 President Trump rally in Melbourne, Florida. This is an outtake from documentary maker Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 11/9. Sayoc's among the group taunting the media, holding up a CNN bashing sign while those next to him yell, "Tell the truth," and "CNN sucks," which happens every single Trump rally these days. Sayoc has actually at least one more court appearance here in Miami. That is in federal court on Friday. The magistrate set that to discuss bond for Sayoc, which prosecutors want denied, as well as Sayoc's extradition to New York, where this high-profile case will ultimately be tried, Sandra.
All right, Phil Keating, thank you.
President Trump, in a newly released interview, saying that he plans to sign an executive order ending birthright citizenship for babies born here to non-citizens. This is thousands of migrants from Central America head north toward the border. Andrew McCarthy, former U.S. Attorney, Fox News contributor, here to talk about this. First, the president with Laura Ingraham last night and what he said about this. This is from Axios now, where he made the news. Watch.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess
14th
what?
Amendment.
You don't.
You don't.
Number one, you don't need that.
All right, that from Axios today. You write a piece already. It's hot. It's online.
It's hot, right off the
Here we
presses.
go. On substance, you say, I believe the president is right.
Right.
On substance.
Yeah, on the 14th Amendment, I think there's no, to my mind, what the key phrase, Bill, in the 14th Amendment is subject to the jurisdiction. That is a person born in the United States subject to the jurisdiction at the time of the person's birth. When the 14th Amendment was ratified, that was understood to mean, did you owe allegiance to this country or to some other countries?
Interesting. So here it is, just to read it for our viewers, 14th Amendment on screen. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Your answer leaves some wiggle room for that definition.
Well, yeah, jurisdiction this is a very charged topic, and jurisdiction is going to be a hotly contested subject. To give the other side of the argument its due, what the other side will say is subject to the jurisdiction simply means that you're subject to the laws and decrees of the United States while you're here, which would mean if you were born here, you're a citizen, and that's the way the understanding has proceeded over the decades. The question is somebody who is born here of parents who are not here legally a citizen of the United States simply by the physical fact of being born here?
The argument he is making in that interview is that he thought it had to go through Congress to be codified. And then his own lawyers told him, no, you can do this through executive order.
Yeah, I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong about that.
Well, his lawyers would be wrong about that if that's the case.
Yeah, and he's got very good lawyers. They could be right, I could be wrong. But here's what I think. Aside from the 14th Amendment, Congress has enacted a statute that codifies the 14th Amendment. And we have been proceeding for decades under the understanding that somebody born here is a citizen. And we've been proceeding under that statute. I don't think the president unilaterally can change a law that we've been proceeding with under a statute for all this time. I think he has to go through
Ken
Congress.
Paxton from Texas, right? He was with us a few hours ago, and we asked him about it, and he said the following.
This is something that I think most Americans find unacceptable, that you create an incentive for somebody to cross the border, have a baby, and suddenly they're a citizen. I have no doubt that this will go all the way up to the Supreme Court and that there'll be lots of discussions. I don't think we've had a case like this maybe ever, but at least not in a very long time.
I'll get you to respond to him. Lindsey Graham tweeted out a short time ago, calls the law absurd. Yep. And apparently he will introduce a bill in the Senate.
Yeah, I think he should. And if this is going to be done, if it's got a prayer of standing up to scrutiny by the courts, it's got to be done by Congress. We've seen situations like with the Military Commissions Act, where a president had a lot of precedent behind him to make a unilateral determination that we're going to have military commissions, and yet the Supreme Court said, Mr. President, you need Congress here.
Two more things. If you do executive order, does it go to the Supreme Court? Is there a challenge immediately in some court somewhere?
If he signs an executive order before the ink is dry, there'll be an injunction.
That beats lunchtime.
Yeah, it does.
Your piece concludes the following, back on screen. If the president actually issues an executive order changing the birthright citizenship policy, I doubt the sun will set before an injunction is issued. I am in favor of changing the current understanding of birthright citizenship, but I believe such a change must be done by statute if it has any hope of surviving court scrutiny. And even then, I give it less than a 50-50 chance.
Yeah, I think for sure we know this. The liberal bloc on the Supreme Court will all vote against it. And they just need one more vote to say jurisdiction means if you're born here, you're a citizen. And I have a feeling they'll get one.
What about the current makeup of the court?
Yeah, I still think they'll get one. I still think they'll get the one they need.
I don't know. Check it out online. Nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you,
last time I saw you was in the Kavanaugh hearing.
Sure was.
That day, so good to see you again. Andrew McCarthy, thanks you in studio. You bet. Sandra, what's next?
The Florida pipe bomb suspect facing 5 federal charges, including threats against 2 former presidents. Could there be more charges coming? A criminal defense attorney is here to weigh in next.
I'm hoping that there are other pieces of evidence that exonerate him, that show that he was not involved. But right now, we're at the stage of a determination.
But additional counts could be tacked on if he is tried in New York. He's looking at 48 years behind bars if convicted. Jonna Spilbor is a criminal defense attorney. She joins us now. So first off, more than 100 potential targets. It felt like we saw a lot last week. There was potentially more in his sights.
Right. But in his defense, right now what we know is that he had basically a list. He had names on a piece of paper, and which also included the names of the actual victims that we now know. So the question is, can that list lead to additional charges? And the answer to that is, if it's just a list, Sandra, and nothing more, then the short answer to that is probably not.
Wow.
If it is a list, though, with any other substantial step, then yes, there could potentially be dozens of additional charges.
And we know that CNN was obviously a target here. They recovered others, including an editor at the New York Times, suggesting that he was going after other media outlets.
Right.
So he made his first court appearance. That was largely procedural. But then we'll see him. This next hearing was going to take place on Friday. What do you expect to happen there?
And that's also going to be largely procedural. I think the focus will be on the extradition element because they want to get him to New York. And it's very hard to fight extradition. Basically, he would have to be able to demonstrate that that they don't have the right guy, that he's the wrong guy, that the print doesn't belong to him. And to be honest with you, that's not going to fly. He'd also have to perhaps show that New York doesn't have jurisdiction. But when you have dozens of or several potential explosives land in New York has jurisdiction. So that's really going to be pro forma on Friday as well, I expect.
Donna, we really look back at last week, and it was almost every day that we were coming in and we were learning about more packages, and thank God none of them actually went back and went off and injured anybody. But you look at what they had to do to get there, the fingerprints, DNA, social media posts, all that went into what was really a really rapid process for the federal, state, and local officials to get this guy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's be honest. He's pretty dumb, which is a good thing, because I think it made it very easy for federal authorities to figure out who he was and connect these dots before anything terrible happened. Luckily, none of these bombs detonated, none of these explosives
So much
detonated,
evidence.
which also may be part of his defense. The fact, were they capable of detonating? I think we're going to hear more about that in the coming weeks.
All right, we got to ask you about this missing Wisconsin teenager. Everybody's been following this story. The two parents dead. She's been missing, and now there is a new development in this case of this Kloss girl and the Kloss home. A man arrested for stealing from their home, but apparently no connection to the teenager's disappearance.
So they say. Now get what he stole. Here's a man who went into, which is basically a crime scene. This is a murder mystery. He went into the home and stole clothing, some of which belongs to the young 13-year-old missing daughter, Jamie Kloss. Now, why do you do that, Sandra? I mean, this has a very large creep factor here, but so far authorities are unwilling to connect him to the potential murder and disappearance and are only charging him with the burglary.
I mean, I think that leaves everybody bewildered. Do you find it hard to believe they have not been able to track her down, or at least her body?
I think this is very scary, because if this young girl were alive when her parents were shot, that makes her a witness, and nobody's going to want to keep a living witness. Police have already said that she's not a suspect. I think this case is so fluid, things could turn on a dime. So we're going to have to wait and see in this one, too.
No connection to someone who entered the home where all this is going on, stole the clothing of the missing teenager.
Doesn't make sense, but I think there's a caution here that's necessary, because police need a whole lot more information to connect this dot, and maybe they'll get it. They don't want to come out and say that he's a suspect until they have more, and that's smart, in case he's not connected, and then the next person will say, hey, you didn't think it was me, and that would form a defense.
We will likely find out more soon on that front, at least we hope so.
Yeah.
And then as far as Cesar Sayoc is concerned, he will be back in court for that hearing on Friday. Hopefully we'll learn a lot more there as well. John, it was great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Bill?
Outnumbered comes up next. Quick preview with Harris and Melissa. What you working on, ladies? Hello, Melissa.
Hey, Bill. So it is 1 week to the day until we cast our vote. President Trump going all out, holding 11 rallies for GOP candidates in the next week. As he says, he's not in the ballot, but he kind of is, right? Brand new polling about how much the president means to voters in these midterms and how he may impact their choices. And the president reportedly considering executive action to end birthright citizenship, which makes all babies born on U.S. soil American citizens. Whether he has that authority and if it would be the right thing to do, that's a big question. All that plus our hashtag one lucky guy outnumbered at the top of the hour. Bill.
See you then. Thanks, Melissa. Jamal Khashoggi's fiance is now speaking out. Her urgent 100 points, we'll take that. Entering this morning's trading, the Dow was on pace for its worst month since May of 2010. There was some good news, though, on the consumer side. U.S. consumer confidence rose to an 18-year high in October, largely driven by a robust labor market. A lot of pressure on companies like Amazon, right, Smitty?
And pressures on a company like General Electric, who had some disappointing earnings and dividend cut, and that stock's having not such a great day. But look at the broader market. Dow up 300 points. The president tweeted about that consumer confidence number, saying its highest level since 2000. He also tweeted about the Fed and the stock market, massively up since election, but is now taking a little bit of a pause. Interesting he should reference that, because this is a rally in the context of what has been a wild ride for this stock market. So
26.6 was your high on the Dow, so we're about 1,900 points below that.
It's been a rough October, but Charles Payne was on the program last hour. Well, he's sounding still very bullish for the end of the year. He's forecasting that the U.S. stock market still will finish up for the year. But the president said,
go with Charles.
The president said, when it comes to midterms, if you want your stocks to go down, I strongly suggest voting Democrat. They like the Venezuela financial model, high taxes and open borders. That's his message on that.
Got that. 7 days out.
There
we go. Some early voting happening right now, but 7 days away.
And the big jobs report on Friday, by the way.
We'll check that out. 9 minutes now before the hour.
A haunting admission in a German courtroom. A former nurse, Niels Hogel, says accusations that he killed 100 patients over a decade ago are largely accurate. The murder charges stem from the 41-year-old's work at 2 hospitals. In a previous trial, he said he intentionally caused cardiac crises in about 90 patients because he enjoyed being able to resuscitate them. Hogel is already serving a life sentence for 2 other murders.
The fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi now criticizing President Trump for his response. After the Washington Post columnist's alleged murder, Khashoggi's fiancé urging the president to demand more details from Saudi Arabia and a search for justice. Benjamin Hall is on that story live in London. What are we hearing, Ben?
Yeah, hi, Bill. You know, about a week ago, Saudi Arabia came out and admitted that Khashoggi's death was murder. A few days after that, they admitted that it was premeditated murder. Well, since then, this story has gone rather quiet, despite the investigations which are ongoing both in Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And so this statement, this speech by Khashoggi's fiancée is really seen as an attempt to keep his case in the spotlight. Remember, she was outside the consulate the day when he disappeared, and indeed she was waiting for him till the bitter end that day. Well, speaking at this conference in London, she admitted she did not know who was responsible for his death, and she appealed directly to President Trump.
President Trump should reveal the truth and ensure justice be served. He should not pave the way for a cover-up of my fiancé's murder. Let's not let money taint our conscience and compromise our values.
So no punches pulled there, but the investigation is continuing to move forward, albeit at a slower pace than before. The Saudi public prosecutor who's leading the investigation from the Saudi Arabian point of view visited the consulate for himself for the first time, days after admitting that that murder was premeditated and that Saudi Arabian agents were behind it. While Turkey are still demanding answers of their own on a number of key points. First of all, if this was premeditated murder, well, who in Saudi Arabia ordered the team of 15 to carry it out? And Turkey are also now demanding extradition for those 15 men so they can be tried in Turkey. And they, of course, are still being held in Saudi Arabia. And the big question, still nobody knows where Khashoggi's body is. Saudi Arabia always saying that they had given it to a Turkish collaborator of theirs and that he disposed of it. And as such, they do not know where it is. Bill?
CIA Director Gina Haspel just came back from Turkey. Anything new on that trip?
No, and in fact, we've been waiting a number of days to hear about that. She got back last week. She briefed President Trump on Thursday, and there had been reports that she had heard the audio tape. The audio tapes Turkey claimed to have, which supposedly proved Khashoggi was both tortured and dismembered inside the consulate. They met on Thursday, and we're waiting for a report of what was said between the two of them and whether President Trump is going to take any steps against Saudi Arabia as a result. But it seems that for the moment that this is just going to continue until Saudi Arabia finish their investigation in a few weeks, until Turkey reach theirs. But there's also an understanding at the moment that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are doing a deal behind closed doors to reach an agreement which will unsettle neither parties too much. And I think that's the geopolitical angle which we're seeing going on behind the scenes.
Something we will track. Thank you, Benjamin Hall in London. Thanks.
President Trump making headlines this morning saying he wants to restrict birthright. Charles Payne from the Fox Business Network. And I said, how much does this market movement and these wild swings have to do with the midterm elections coming up and whether or not the House flips? And he kind of said, well, a little bit. I said, a little bit. And he then said a lot, and these markets are closely watching what's going to happen.
I've been watching what's like Amazon and Netflix because they've been such high rollers for a long time and they've been getting hammered over the past 2 weeks. I know you would advise us, and people like Payne would say you want to get the sellers out of there. And maybe that's what they're going for right now because they seem to be a bit more steady today than they were over the past several days.
Not necessarily, but sometimes that can make for a healthier market. We'll see. But it has been a heck of a month of October for this stock market. Everybody's talking about it. Perhaps some optimism sneaks back in here in the final months of the year. The Dow was, by the way, on pace for its worst monthly